Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. Trump is making some picks for his team, for his administration. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. We have an appearance by Fang, one of our favorite guests, to discuss something he wrote. And I will be interviewing the chair of the Libertarian Party, Angela McArdle, about her strategy for influencing Donald Trump a little bit later. Hello, Nomiki. Nice to see you.
Robby, I know you have a lot on your mind, and this is a full show,
yes.
But I hear you have some thoughts. What's on your radar?
All right, let's get to it. As we analyze what went so right for the Trump campaign and what went horribly, horribly wrong for the Kamala campaign, I'd like to take a look at the two candidates' media strategies. Trump's embrace of podcasts and alternative media made him more popular than ever before and allowed him to reintroduce himself to young people, particularly young men, and make gains with working Americans, with Latino voters, and so on. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris spent $20 million on star-studded events, concerts, and celebrity endorsements and meet and greets. Katy Perry, Lady Gaga, Bon Jovi, even Oprah, whose production company reportedly received $1 million to collaborate with Kamala. Now, Oprah, it should be noted, denied she herself was paid anything. Still, the strategy is self-apparent. Kamala Harris thought celebrity endorsements from liberal Hollywood would help sell her to the American people. How did that work out? Now, there was one potential celebrity endorsement, not from a mainstream celebrity, but a celebrity all the same, that I think would have made a difference had she earned it. That celebrity is the popular podcast giant Joe Rogan, who interviewed Trump in the closing days of the campaign and endorsed the former president on the eve of the election. But Kamala Harris had an opportunity to court Rogan and, more importantly, Rogan's millions of watchers, listeners, and subscribers. And Rogan was happy to have a conversation with Kamala Harris. But according to Rogan, who just revealed new details about his overtures to the Kamala campaign, Harris's handlers were nervous about doing the interview after he told them it would be unedited. Take a listen.
Look, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to Kamala Harris. I'm like, I bet there's a person in there. I bet I can get to that person.
Yeah.
I wanted to find that person. I don't want to hear all the speeches. I don't want to hear, I was raised middle class. I don't want to hear any of that.
She's a roller skater. You know that?
No, I would love to find that out.
Yeah.
I would love to talk to her about all kinds of I literally said, like, because there was a few restrictions of things they didn't want to talk about. But I said, I don't give a Go get her in here. Like, whatever you want to talk about. And they want to know if I edit. I'm like, there's not going to be any editing. There's no editing.
Yeah.
We're not going to edit. But
yeah, that's the same thing they asked us. Is there an edit? You know?
I just wanted to talk. I feel like you give someone a couple of hours and you start talking about anything, I'm going to see the pattern of the way you think.
Rogan also said the campaign wanted to give him no more than an hour with Harris, even though his interviews typically go for 2 or 3 hours. They're that long because Rogan likes to have real, unscripted conversations. He likes when his guests move beyond talking points and are forced to actually say what they think or explain how they think. Someone, either Harris or her handlers, evidently thought she could not handle such an environment or that it wasn't worth her time. That's a pity. Now, of course, there are other Democrats, even would-be Democratic presidential candidates, who weren't afraid to go on Joe Rogan. Bernie Sanders appeared on Rogan when he sought the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. In fact, he earned Rogan's endorsement. Remarkably, mainstream liberal pundits actually used this fact against Bernie, as if it was some mark of shame rather than a major accomplishment in terms of reaching prospective voters. Now, Bernie Sanders was asked about this in a recent CNN appearance and rightly chided fellow Democrats for being afraid of Rogan. Let's watch.
Joe Rogan, very popular podcaster. He endorsed Donald Trump in the final days of the election. 4 years ago, you went on his podcast. You got a lot of blowback for doing that and for touting that he endorsed you. So is this the kind of example of Democrats perhaps shunning or vilifying people who don't totally agree with them?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Look, you can have an argument with Rogan, agree with him, disagree with him, but what's the problem going on in those shows? It's hard for me to understand that. So I think we've got to get, and clearly you have an alternative media out there, a lot of podcasts that have millions and millions of viewers. Get on the show. Disagree with you here. I agree with you there. I don't see a problem in doing that. And you're right. I got vilified by some of the Democratic establishment because I went on Rogan's show. Now a lot of other people are doing just that.
Straight facts from Sanders. If Democrats are too afraid to occasionally set foot outside their mainstream media safe space, they're going to lose the rest of the country. Right now, on social media, many Democrats are expressing the following sentiment. If only we had our own Joe Rogan. I know they're so fond of fact checks, so here's one. They already had a Joe Rogan. His name was Joe Rogan. He was supportive of the ostensibly independent but solidly Democratic-leaning populist presidential candidate, Bernie Sanders. That's the thing. Progressive leftists used to consider themselves outside the establishment. Then they became the establishment, aligned themselves with panic-stricken media voices who inveigh constantly against alleged misinformation cropping up in alternative media spaces. All their finger-wagging and cozying up to the traditional elite media hasn't seemed to help them very much. Certainly couldn't get Kamala Harris over the finish line. Now, let's consider Trump's media strategy. According to some terrific reporting from Time magazine, and by the way, mainstream media still does good journalism, and I'm happy to celebrate them when that does, in fact, happen, as it did in this case. A great article from Time magazine about a 27-year-old Trump staffer named Alec Bruchowitz, who came up with the idea to get Trump on the podcast circuit. Now, when he pitched the idea to Trump, Trump said to ask his son Barron about it. Barron thought it was a great idea, and so they got Trump on with Aiden Ross, which was a podcast that Barron was a fan of, then Logan Paul, Theo Vaughn, and other podcasters who are wildly popular, again, particularly with young men. This strategy culminated in the Rogan interview, which received almost 40 million views on YouTube in just 3 days. So whose media strategy was better, Trump or Kamala? Think we know.
Oh, listen. He won all the battleground states by a couple points. So it's not whether it was a podcast game or she didn't speak to Latinos when they were calling for her to come to the community and organize much earlier. I mean, there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of that contributed to her loss of a couple points in these battleground states, and a lot of things that contributed to his win. Mainly the fact that he has the RNC, he's been doing this for 10 years, everybody knows who he is, he's the most famous man in the world, and frankly, yeah, you know what, why she probably didn't go on the podcast? Because Joe Rogan wasn't going to be nice to her, and it was a couple days before the election, and he was very nice to Donald Trump, and she didn't need the negative press. It was a few days before the election, and they wanted 3 hours in Texas, a state that she wasn't competing in. I don't think he would have been nice to her. I think he would have asked some ridiculous questions. They would have clipped that up. It would have been a weapon for Trump. And you know, and I want to get down to the business here about Joe Rogan supporting Bernie Sanders, who I was on his campaign, right? Joe Rogan wanted Bernie Sanders' audience, and he got a good chunk of it. And Joe Rogan is no leftist, was no leftist at the time, and frankly used him. And to endorse in a primary is very different than endorsing in a general election. You know, endorsing Bernie Sanders was essentially a weapon against the establishment Democrats. And I think he utilized that because he knew his audience, and he wanted to build that audience even larger. He wanted to bring over more progressive men that also could, you know, overlap with him on other issues, maybe even cultural issues. And I think that's how it's played out. And since then, he's gotten ever more conservative. He's supporting Donald Trump. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have like nothing in common, pretty much.
Well, there are certainly a lot of voters in America who feel differently. There are voters who supported Bernie and then went to Trump. There aren't a lot of them, but it did happen. I think there were voters who, if they were ranking their candidates, it was Bernie, Trump, Hillary, going back to 2016.
Right.
There were working class people who thought that both Bernie and Trump, Bernie more so, but Trump more so than Hillary, were talking to working class issues. Hillary didn't run a very effective campaign to channel disaffected labor-type voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, et cetera. I would disagree. I mean, you're right that Joe Rogan has certainly become more conservative over time. COVID is a big thing that happened that turned a lot of, I would say, anti-established people on the left more friendly to conservatives, or conservatives who were equally skeptical as they were of some of the public health measures that were implemented. I don't agree that he would have been mean. I've never seen an interview with him. Maybe it's possible. I don't catch every second of Rogan. There's like 3 hours of it every day. I don't think I've ever seen him be mean to a guest, even when he disagrees. I remember he had Bari Weiss on, and he does disagree with her on a lot of foreign policy and a lot of Israel policy. And he disagreed with her, but it was extremely polite. He was not mean to her at all. So I can't imagine him being mean to Kamala. I think the risk for Kamala is that she would not have sounded sincere or interesting for that long a period of time, and her people knew that, and so they didn't want to put her in that environment. But that's an indictment of the candidate.
I don't think that's true. I think that when you're coming into the final days of an election, every single choice you make is a major choice. And to go off to Texas, sit with him for 3 hours, right? And it's not a swing state. It's it obviously.
Well, but
Texas,
it's not like it matters just in Texas. It's his viewers
I
are
understand
everywhere.
that. It's that she had to leave going to campaign in those final days, and he wanted 3 hours. And of course, you have to prepare. And it wasn't something that was a priority. And frankly, I don't think she would have won over Joe Rogan's audience. Like, let's be real. I think if anything, it would have amped them up even more and gotten them more excited to vote against her. The other thing about this is we talk about podcasts, but it's really YouTube podcasts, because YouTube podcasts and political podcasts in particular, political shows, are overwhelmingly male audience. The stats are out. I know from having
Our audience is overwhelmingly
yeah,
male,
it can be like 90% male. And then when you go to places like TikTok and you go to places, like traditional podcasts, audio podcasts, it's overwhelmingly female. Yeah. So she really leaned into those spaces. And unfortunately, it didn't reflect because there are a lot of conservative women in this country who just don't listen, I guess, to Pod Save America.
Well, let us know what you think about this. We've got a lot more to get into on Rising today, including interviews with Lee Fang and Angela McArdle, and lots of topics to discuss. Stay with us. Elon Musk is everywhere. Saturday Night Live took a swipe at the tech mogul in its opening dialogue just days after Donald Trump won the election. Let's watch that.
If our planet falls apart, we can all go to Mars with the other man that we love and trust, Elon Musk. All right.
All right. Check it out, Doc Mega. Yeah, but seriously, I run the country now. And America's gonna be like one of my rockets, they're super cool and super fun. But there's a slight chance it could blow up and everybody dies. Anyway, I'm Doc Mega. See you in the White House. USA, USA.
Musk was not impressed with SNL actor Dana Carvey's impersonation, nor was I, even though I usually find Dana Carvey very funny. Elon Musk wrote on X, quote, "Dana Carvey sounds just like Dana Carvey." He later added that SNL is mad Trump won.
Meanwhile, the tech tycoon who's become a political mainstay for Trump's re-election has a fan club. Americans for Responsible Innovation, an AI nonprofit advocacy group, launched a petition on Monday calling on Trump to appoint Musk special advisor on AI. In the petition, the advocacy group writes, quote, "Musk has made major contributions to the field of AI, both as an entrepreneur and as a thought leader. While advancing AI, he has also advocated for AI safety and the need to mitigate existential and catastrophic risks. It is unclear if Musk will be chosen as AI special advisor, but Trump previously signaled his desire to have the tech mogul lead a panel on government cost cutting. Additionally, Musk really wants Trump to intervene in Fed matters. On X Monday, he reshared a post on the platform that Republican Utah Senator Mike Lee posted, saying, quote, "The executive branch should be under the direction of the president. That's how the Constitution was designed. The Federal Reserve is one of many examples of how we've deviated from the Constitution in that regard. Yet another reason why we should hashtag end the Fed." Calls to nix the Fed are not new. Former Congressman Ron Paul published a book in 2009 titled End the Fed, and in June, Republican Kentucky Congressman Thomas Macy introduced a bill to uproot the nation's central bank and transfer it to the Treasury. Regardless, Fed Chair Jerome Powell has said he's not going anywhere. And journalist Kara Swisher shared her thoughts on Musk. Here she is on CNN with Kate Bodwin. Let's watch.
Elon Musk is a big personality, and you think that that aspect of Elon, who you know, could really push him to kind of flame out in terms of being in favor with Donald Trump pretty quickly.
Well, they're both narcissists, and there can be only one narcissist as head of the country, and that's Donald Trump, who just won the election. I think, he owes things to Elon, but at some point he if he takes too much of the attention. Think about Steve Bannon. Do you remember he was on the cover of that magazine and how quickly he got out, even though he was critical to Trump's first campaign, and he was right in the middle of the White House, and then he wasn't. And so Trump, goes through people like tissues, essentially. And I think even if it's Elon Musk, and Elon has a lot of money and means and things like that, they're going to clash at some point. There's also a lot of people around Musk who are, they're going to get increasingly nervous. Again, as I said, I've heard from a number of them that, they were like, oh, you're kind of right about this guy. And I was like, yeah, I told you, he wants influence.
Yeah, look, I think this is a worthwhile question, how long the relationship between Donald Trump and Elon Musk can or will last. And I take the point that in the past, other people, like, for instance, Steve Bannon, who also had big personalities and were a little spotlight-seeking, have not fared well when they're in Trump's orbit, because she has a point that there can be only one. That's at least how things used to be. But Trump is an older man now. He ran a more, I know you don't like it, but a more restrained and responsible campaign this time, in large part due to Elon's influence. He took Elon's advice on doing more on the ground game and doing more early voting. He is listening to Elon so far. I don't know. Maybe it lasts longer. I think that would be to the benefit. I'm more favorably inclined toward Elon, certainly than you are and that Democrats are in general. I think Elon would be a good influence on Trump, particularly on AI regulation and tech regulation more specifically. Now, I don't want to get a ton new Tesla subsidies or something. That would be bad. I'm not for energy subsidies at all, but otherwise I'm happy to see Elon involved. Oh, and if we end the Fed and do all that, that will be hallelujah, be still my beating heart. I don't expect any of that to happen. I'm setting my expectations lower than many other libertarians, but yeah.
Yeah, not all Republicans are the same, as you know very well. I think, Elon Musk is going to reach his limit. He's been outstaying his welcome at Mar-a-Lago, supposedly. That's been some reporting there. But he has been on the golf course with the Trump family.
And having dinner with them every night and hanging out, and he's moved in. He's moved into Mar-a-Lago.
He is really happy about this. His 15 wives and 85 children are probably thrilled.
There's plenty of room.
There's plenty of room at Mar-a-Lago. Anyways, I mean, it would be interesting to see what he's appointed to, if he is appointed to something. I don't think he's going to be appointed to anything. I think
he wants to be an informal advisor.
Which is what Steve Bannon is, by the way, and what he was afterwards, too. There's a lot more power in that. Steve Bannon, goes around the world, and he starts his little projects when he's not in prison, now that he's out of prison. But there are some really interesting folks that have been brought up and have been now mentioned as potential, or he is going to appoint. Marco Rubio is going to be Secretary of State.
Possibly. Right? That's not confirmed.
No, nothing's confirmed yet. They have.
But Kristi Noem as Department of Homeland Security has been confirmed. That one, I think, surprised a lot of people. It was not exactly on the bingo card. Like Elon Musk, this is someone who I think is slightly more libertarian in character. Homeland Security is a fundamentally unlibertarian position because it's about violating civil liberties to keep us safe.
How are you going to manage?
Kristi Noem was someone who, during the pandemic, was a little bit more, ran her state in a way that was skeptical of government intervention. So if she carries that same spirit, again, like Elon Musk, if she carries that same spirit to the advising she's doing in the government, it could be good.
It's just interesting. I mean, even with the Marco Rubio thing, seeing somebody who was once out of circuit with Donald Trump enemies, and then he really was able to make his way back in the inner circle. And I'm curious if Elon Musk has a little bit of a tiff with Donald Trump at some point, which is bound to happen, as Kara Swisher says. They're narcissists, and will he be able to get back into the circle? I don't know.
I guess we'll find out. The one thing about Kristi Noem I would say is that it's kind of funny how much Republicans have made the death of pets a thing lately, and of course the reason she got in all that trouble and controversy was for admitting in her book that she killed a dog or put down a dog. Will the party of Peanuts retribution be able to stomach this? I don't know. Peanuts, who's watching down from us with Harambe and blessing all that we do. The raccoon. Yeah.
We'll have to see in the confirmation hearing how that's going to go.
I guess so. Justice for Peanuts. Lots more to talk about today on Rising. Please stay with us. And now some media news. Veteran broadcaster Chris Wallace is leaving CNN after just 3 years there. This announcement comes as his CNN weekend program, The Chris Wallace Show, averaged below 600,000 total viewers during the election year.
CNN CEO Mark Thompson called Wallace one of the most respected political journalists in the business. Wallace jumped over to the network after leaving Fox News, where he anchored for 18 years. Per Fox News Digital, Wallace did not accept CNN's offer to extend his contract, and according to the Daily Beast, which first reported the story, the 77-year-old plans to remain in the business, but he's going independent, the independent podcast route.
Well. This is interesting. So Chris Wallace left Fox News several years ago, joined CNN. He'd had some friction with Tucker Carlson, with the direction of the network. He was someone who was always pretty, I would say, centrist, or even, I think, by the end, a little bit more combative with the Republican Party than he even was with the Democratic Party. He made himself no fans and allies among conservative viewers at Fox. And so CNN seemed a more natural home for him, although there are fewer viewers there overall. So he was not happy with the success. Obviously, the digital platform he was briefly involved with was a huge debacle, disaster. I know people who worked there and left that thing thinking, oh my God, what a mess was that.
Yeah. Horrible rollout.
So yeah, it didn't quite work out for him there. And it's interesting, he's correct. I think that a lot of independent media, podcasts, et cetera, he sees the impact they had on this last presidential cycle, how Donald Trump was able to use that effectively. That's something we've talked about a lot today. See my radar if you haven't caught it to a further discussion of that. But here's the thing. It is difficult for people to just suddenly say, I think it's harder than a lot of them think, to go, I'm going the independent route, I'm starting my own podcast, I'm going to be an alternative media person, I'm going to be on social media, I'm just going to do it. You have to fundamentally understand this ecosystem in order to thrive in it. And I say that as someone who, when we're kind of part of this ecosystem, even though we're working for a major media organization, our platform is YouTube. We have a lot of guests from the alternative media space. I think we speak to those issues. I did not understand this whatsoever. When I started hosting Rising 4 years ago now, right. I did not get my news primarily from YouTube. I got it from cable news and from reading newspapers and magazines. So I didn't understand that ecosystem. I don't know if Chris Wallace does or not, but it doesn't come naturally to you.
I'm going to guess no. I'm going to say 77-year-old Chris Wallace, whose father was also an icon, Mike Wallace.
I think you might be right about that,
Nomiki. Probably does not listen to, he sees Joe Rogan, he's like, I can do that better. Yeah, he actually probably could do it better than Joe Rogan. But that's not the point, as we know. It's a universe that is going to be completely foreign to him, and he is a straight news reporter. I mean, when I used to do a ton of Fox News, I was on twice a day. And at the time, that was when they had a news side. There still is a separation. They still have a news side. But it was a very, very stark separation. You had Shepard Smith, who was on the news side. You had Chris Wallace on the news side. Even Bret Baier was, I think, a little bit more newsy back then.
Actually, honestly, I think their division between news and opinion is stricter than CNN or MSNBC, right? Bret Baier is anchoring the 6 p.m. hour. That's a news hour. And then next up is Laura Ingraham and Jesse Waters, and those are opinion hours, right? It's a hard line. But the two don't intermingle very often.
They don't, but it's less so from the days of Roger Ailes. Roger Ailes actually, oh my God, I can't believe I'm defending him, but he actually protected the news side more. He had a notable friendship for years with Shepard Smith. He was one of the first hires at Fox, and before I think he worked with him at CNBC, if I'm correct. So he's been part of an institution, a different era of the news world, and CNN is becoming a little bit more gossip. I mean, it has over the years, especially under Jeff Zucker. It was becoming much more gossipy, and put him in the ring and have him fight it out. And he's not that guy.
My point being, I can point to the people who host, who are personalities at Fox, and tell you, it's very clear whether that's a news person or that's an opinion person. I think it's actually less clear at CNN and MSNBC.
I don't disagree.
And this is not just to bash CNN. Frankly, this is going to surprise our viewers. I've actually found a lot of CNN segments to be quite interesting lately. I don't know if that's solely due to the increasing prominence of Scott Jennings, who is by far my favorite conservative commentator on TV. He's wonderful, he's effective, he's doing such a good job. But they have tried to invite in different perspectives, and they're actually platforming a lot of arguments. Maybe they're taking a page out of our own book. Maybe they watch some Rising and say, hey, we need a little bit of that action, and that's what they have going on. MSNBC is not doing any of that. It's just a grieving session for.
It's totally a grieving
liberal
session. I tuned
women.
in last night, and Nicole Wallace was having a moment. I think what's going to be the challenge for Chris Wallace is getting out of the news mindset, because if he's going to be a YouTube host, he's got to have an opinion, a very strong opinion. If he's going to be a regular podcaster, okay, maybe he can have really interesting interviews and back and forths with notable people. There's more of an audience on the audio side for that. Is it going to be a TikToker? I'm just so curious. What
you also have to. You're right. This makes me think of something. You also, if you're doing a podcast or a long form format, you have to kind of show your personality a little bit. I mean, we sometimes share anecdotes about what's going on in our personal lives or what we think about entertainment, just because we fill time and it's interesting, and the viewers seem to appreciate that. He is billed as such a straight news reporter. Don't get involved. The point of the interview is to grill the subject, and his view is coming from nowhere, is almost like an omniscient.
Right.
He doesn't get involved, which is very much the old newsman style that does not work in these podcast alternative media formats. It very much has to do with the attitudes, the background, the personality of the hosts.
Banter.
And he's not the banter, and he's just not really. I don't know. He doesn't involve himself that way.
You don't think Chris Wallace is going to say, Robby, tell me about your childhood. What really got to you? I mean, even Barbara Walters actually did that sometimes. And she probably would have been great in the podcast space.
I mean, is Chris Wallace going to interrupt a segment or derail a segment to talk about, like, what he's been watching on TV recently? I can't imagine. I can't picture him doing that. And that's kind of what you have to do,
I know nothing
right,
about Chris Wallace other than his father.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. I know Chris Wallace, Fox. I know the man. I've met him before. I've been on his shows before. I can't tell you anything about him other than his father was Mike Wallace and he was on Fox News.
Well, I know CNN has been having some financial difficulties. There was reporting on its top talent, who's safe, who's not. Contracts are being renegotiated where they're telling people we're actually not going to pay you as much.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was the deal for. I think in the statement they said they wanted to retain him, but it could just be they didn't offer him enough money to stay. They wanted him to stay, but they were going to pay him less.
I'll take his job.
I read a report that I think like
CNN, if you want me, I'll take it.
Yeah. I will do it for way less
I can
than
be
him.
serious.
And I'll show personality and
or not. I can do whatever you want, CNN. As long as I'm not a right winger. That's all I care about.
All right.
You can get two of us for the price of a Wallace.
I'm not offering to go. I love my job. I'm not.
And we'll be here.
Oh, and do another.
That's what I didn't get.
I can't host a third and a fourth and a fifth show.
Why couldn't he just do a podcast on the side with his? Well, he's 77. That's probably why. It's too much work.
We will be paying attention to whatever he does, I'm sure, and commenting on it. Lots more to talk about. Wallace Watch. Well, that's not a bad idea.
What's he up to?
More to come on Rising Still. Please stay with us. Well, over the course of the last year, it has been revealed just how much universities, especially elite schools, are devoid of intellectual diversity, at least among the faculty they employ. A recent campus free speech survey commissioned by my friends at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression found that only 19% of students across 254 schools identify as a conservative. This lack of diversity is a big problem for these schools. Recently, Yale University actually floated an idea to solve that problem: hire more conservative faculty.
Reporter for The Sun New York, Novi Shakovsky, wrote a piece after recently attending Yale Buckley's Institute 14th Annual Conference, which focused on recruiting more conservative professors and students. American Enterprise Institute President Robert Doar urged university leaders to make a concerted effort to enroll faculty and student body with different perspectives. He called on a go-to theory of economics: if leaders create a demand, more supply will come. Another such idea put forth by recently established University of Austin, in Austin, Texas, President Pano Canelos: get rid of tenure, which he believes encourages educators to conform to liberal biases. He suggested opting contracts out that will get renewed based on a professor's performance. The university is already implementing this system.
If those ideas don't work, maybe the lack of money coming into the elite institutions will. Harvard is already reporting quite a loss in donations. Total philanthropic contributions fell by $151 million from 2023 to 2024, in part, at large part due to donors' dissatisfaction with the school's allegedly lackluster response to the anti-Israel protests on campus. Those protests really set the Ivy League back. Oh no, I'm so sad.
You know what's really interesting about this? I love how
no millions for Harvard
aren't going to universities. Well, maybe it's because conservatism is not logical. And the majority of students now, I'm sure you've heard this, are women. And schools like the University of Vermont has such a crisis that men are not applying and going to, that they actually are out there recruiting men because they want more diversity in their classrooms. I think this gender divide thing with the election plays out. I mean, you have less educated folks who have voted for, meaning they haven't had higher education, voted for Donald Trump. I wouldn't say elite, I wouldn't say working class, because plenty of people who go to school are in debt and can't make their way out of that debt, as we know too well.
And plenty of people who just do a vocation or something are perfectly smart.
I'm not saying that they're not.
Elite fancy degree.
I'm not, but we're talking
smart.
about universities, and we're talking about
Sure.
who is going to these universities, and if Donald Trump's base, mostly male, and when surveyed, oh my gosh, there was this focus group where they surveyed young men and where they get their education. They said, well, a good chunk of them said, well, I don't need to go to school because I have YouTube.
What's wrong with that? We're on YouTube right now. No, I think that's fine. It would be insane if I thought getting your information from YouTube was
only.
No, you should seek information from multiple sources. I mean, even the sources you think, and we disagree on what is credible and what people should listen to. That's available on YouTube too. YouTube is just a platform, right? People put their Harvard lectures on YouTube. You can watch TED Talks that are all Harvard people. So YouTube is just a platform. Now it's also a place you can get alternative media entrance into the alternative media ecosystem. Yeah, we talk about aliens a lot on this show, and I approach the subject, our viewers can vouch for me here, with the utmost skepticism. I don't believe any of it, and I've grilled some of those whistleblower type people who say, oh, but I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy who knows where the alien corpses are buried, and I've been very skeptical of that, but I think it's fine to be interested in the topic and hear from it. But we're getting a little bit afield. The conservatives, campuses have long had the problem of increasing dominance of a far left progressivism, particularly a cultural progressivism that is so out of step with the American people, and that has, by association with the Democratic Party, tarnished and hurt the Democratic Party, even when they're not really adopting necessarily all those far-left cultural views of the elite educational establishment, but people think Democrats stand for that. And it's killed them.
Yes, there's this appearance.
Because not all Democrats have these views, but all people who have these views are Democrats.
Or not at all. I mean, I think a lot of folks that were protesting on these university campuses, especially for Gaza.
They actually hate Democrats.
They hate Democrats, as we know very well, and some. I think that's the reaction right now from administration, I think, is really about a loss of money. You've had a lot of folks who stand with Israel who have said, we are no longer contributing to your university and your endowment, and as a result, they're pivoting in a direction that they think might be smart to recruit more conservatives to college campus. I don't think it's going to work. I think fundamentally we have an issue. It is a gender issue, and it goes back to are folks interested in getting a higher education? And higher education is the best way to indicate whether you're going to get a well-paid job, and that's in the stats.
Well, but as you just mentioned, there are a lot of people who get an elite degree. If you spend a lot of money, if you go into debt to do it, I don't think it's worth it. I mean, it's worth it in some cases. You're right that getting an education is generally a good thing for your career prospects. But the system is designed to encourage people to spend as much time as possible and as much of their money as possible in as elite as possible education. And that, I think, works for some people, but can be borderline fraudulent, especially if you don't have the money. If it's just your parents' money and they want to, give you a $200,000 Northwestern journalism degree or something, fine. Live your best life. I don't care. But don't trick poorer working people into thinking that's a viable career path if you have to go massively into debt. Don't go massively into debt.
Go to state school. I mean, 100%.
Go to state school. Yeah.
The cost, forget about tuition alone. Then you have the housing, and then you have to pay for these books. I remember one semester I couldn't afford the books, and I was borrowing from my friends, and I was copying them in the library. I don't even know if you can still do that anymore. It was so long ago, but it was like $400 a book. I have no idea what they cost now. It's a scam. The whole thing is a scam. And that, if you want to take on the elites, Donald Trump, where am I looking? Where's the camera? Donald Trump, if you want to take on the elites, take on the textbook industry. Make them go digital or cheaper. That's like a behemoth. That's something you don't want to mess with that textbook
I don't know why you
industry.
need physical copies of the textbooks anymore. One other thing I wanted to say on this subject, obviously Elise Stefanik, who did such an effective job of grilling the poor university presidents who had to defend their campus anti-Semitism policies at those hearings. She has now been elevated to serve in the UN ambassador role. So she really used that stage to call herself to attention by Trump, and I saw a lot of conservatives extremely happy about her being elevated to that role. You know, my thought as those hearings were going on was that when you were seeing the outrage from the Jewish donors or conservative leading donors who were like, well, I can't believe this was happening on this campus. Like, have you not been listening to conservative media for the last 20 years? They've been complaining about liberal bias and intolerance and violations of free speech. I've been writing about it. Fire's been writing about it. College Fix and Campus Reform and National Review and Fox News and a million other conservative organizations. It just now dawned on you that these campuses are hostile to your views and in some place, not, I don't think, at the level of the campus administration, but certainly some of the crazy activist students hostile to Jewish students. You didn't know that was happening? I guess now you know.
Well, I personally felt I had a lot more conservative professors than I would have liked, so I would.
Oh, really?
Yeah, definitely. We've gotten debates. I mean, there's a lot of hawks at these institutions, too.
That's true.
So that's something Elise Stefanik and the other hawks have in common.
Well, I loved sparring with, my liberal professors, and sometimes you don't. I've had professors who I had no idea. I couldn't tell what their personal political leanings were, and they effectively countered and argued, depending on the student they were engaged with. Those are the really outstanding academics, I think. The tricky professors.
Sneaky professors.
All right, coming up next, we've got more to get into, including an interview with Li Fang. Stay around.
A diverse coalition of men, white, black, Latino, came out in droves for Donald Trump in the election just a week ago. Trump saw a 13-point increase this year from 2020. Young men swung toward Trump by nearly 30%, and while deciphering why they voted the way that they did may seem tricky, it's really not.
As journalist Li Fang writes, quote, young men struggle with addiction, loneliness, and suicide at skyrocketing rates, only to be dehumanized as oppressors by the dominant liberal culture.
Fang further points out how these young men grew up in an era of Me Too, in which phrases toxic masculinity and hegemonic masculinity have frequently been thrown around by the left, leading to the alienation of this group. Here to dive in is independent journalist Li Fang. Thank you so much for joining us, Li.
Thanks for having me.
So, the numbers are fascinating when you really start to dig in. 54% of women voted for Kamala Harris and 55% of men voted for Donald Trump. And you really focus in on just the loneliness of the younger generation. I'm sure that's surrounding things like TikTok and COVID after COVID and YouTube shows and, gaming, of course. But women are also going through that loneliness too. So why do you think Trump was able to appeal to young men and not to women in the same way, given that a lot of them are experiencing similar things?
No, that's right. Young women are also experiencing higher rates of loneliness over the last decade, perhaps shaped by the pandemic lockdowns and addiction to phones, and what have you. But look, young men in particular are looking to rebel. This is a transgressive demographic. And for young men age 18 through 29, they've only known a liberal dominated culture in the media, in entertainment, and education that has taught them that they are the oppressor, that where there's kind of ascendant liberal identity politics has dominated most of the cultural sphere. So selecting Donald Trump is really the kind of transgressive move for most young men. He certainly campaigned as the outsider candidate, the anti-establishment candidate. Will he govern as such? That's not clear. Is there a clear policy agenda to help men in terms of improving their lot, working on these loneliness issues, the higher suicide rate, the addiction rate? That's also elusive. But in terms of the identity projected to young men, Donald Trump was the transgressive candidate.
When he won in 2016, Donald Trump, I wrote an article for Reason magazine about how I thought it was partly explained as a backlash against what we were calling political correctness then. Now we call it, wokeness or something like that. We were calling it political correctness back then. And that ended up being the most popular article. I think it's the second most popular article I've ever written. Like, it got 1 million views or something. It was clearly an appealing explanation at the time. So I do very much take your point, and that was 8 years ago. People who were young people then are voters now, I think does help to explain what has happened. You talk about, let's get more specific on what we mean by a cultural liberalism. The examples I'm thinking of are the consultants for large corporations or media organizations or entertainment organizations to have commercials be about, the Gillette commercial, or I think it was Gillette, right? The razor commercial about how something's gone wrong with them and they don't really have a place, or traditional manhood doesn't have a place in our society and in our marketing. I think that kind of thing has been very harmful.
I think that's right. And then there's also the call out culture. Me Too started as a very justified, legitimate effort to spotlight high profile abusers, rapists, people who have taken their position of power and sexually assaulted or otherwise abused women. And it quickly transformed into a call out culture. It's hard to find a young man who doesn't know someone personally in terms of their classmates or their close personal peer space, who have not been falsely accused in school or on social media. This type of culture is just incredibly toxic. It leads to a backlash. There is a reaction against it. Instead of promoting a form of gender relations that treats everyone with a form of respect and dignity, we've seen this kind of angry witch hunt to find oppressors, to kind of label all young men as hegemonic masculinity, toxic oppressors. The terminology that's bandied around kind of changes from year to year, but it's led men to feel victimized, to say, hey, look, we're struggling too. We're struggling with gambling, with addiction. We're not going to college at the same rates as women. We're not making even as much in many metro areas. For a lot of young men, they're looking side to side and saying, for the dominant culture to call us oppressors, it just doesn't match our reality.
Dominant culture, come on, Lee. Women still make 70% on the dollar as a man. There is some stuff here that's a little questionable. Do we have to be reactive?
That's certainly true for people above the age of 30, but for young men, for people in their early 20s, in most metro areas, we're seeing a shift where women are making the same amount or even more than men. So that material reality is changing for this generation.
And that's reflective in the fact that young men are not getting higher education, as you mentioned. I'm curious, though, to me it doesn't seem like it's because of Me Too. I feel it's because men are receiving their information from different places than other men that might be, in that 44% that voted for Kamala Harris, and also women, which is, they're on YouTube, as we've discussed many times on the show. YouTube audiences are overwhelmingly male, and they're gaming, which is an overwhelmingly male-dominated field, and they're just receiving information in different places. And so as a result, when you're in these echo chambers, these attitudes can be reinforced. But I'm a woman. I operate around women and men in both those spaces. I'm curious why is the burden being put on the Me Too movement, which is a very legitimate movement, flawed, has been weaponized, I will acknowledge that. Why is the burden being put on the women as the oppressors rather than men taking some responsibility and maybe getting outside of their echo chambers, and other men talking to other men about how is it you can be pulled back from these echo chambers?
Well, I don't think the blame falls on any broad group of category. It's not the fault of men. It's not the fault of women. But there are certain activists, certain political leaders, certain political institutions that have painted with a broad brush. There's an empathy gap. Instead of a gender ideology that tries to bring us together, that tries to find the good in all of us. We've seen activist movements and political causes that have attacked young men, that have smeared them, and to make them feel victimized. And above that, in terms of the balkanized media, you're right, we're in a very fragmented media space, but the Kamala campaign, the Democratic campaigns, they haven't taken advantage of it. Kamala had an opportunity to speak to the most popular podcast for young men, Joe Rogan. She was invited on the podcast. She declined the 3-hour interview. She kept changing the goalposts and delaying the interview and eventually essentially declining it. And, for young men, they've grown up in this culture where they remember the liberal activist campaigns to get Joe Rogan removed from Spotify, to get him removed from YouTube. For the Kamala Harris campaign to refuse this interview, it's not just a tactical error. It looks a lot like, for I think a lot of men, Kamala Harris implicitly endorsing the cancellation of Joe Rogan to treat him as too icky. I mean, this was, Joe Rogan on a normal week receives 11 million listeners. During the presidential campaign, it was something like 50 million. I mean, this is many times more. This is exponentially more than any cable news interview or any broadcast media. For a lot of young men, they're primed in the cancel culture wars. This kind of Me Too culture permeates many different institutions. And for the Kamala Harris campaign to mimic the kind of worst tendencies of this movement, I think it's very triggering for young men.
Right, because I also think it's done at the behest of, frankly, a small number of activists and sort of professional consultant, advisor type, educator type people who are brought in by corporations or schools or whatever the institution is, who just have terrible advice for how to wreck the place and make it more hostile for men and women alike, to make people speak to each other in more alien terminology, to have hostility ramp up, and these people are paid tons of money to advise these things, and I think it's that kind of mindset that unfortunately has been has permeated or made its way into some democratic politics in an unfortunate election-killing way. We got to leave it there. Lee Fang, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Now for our daily dose of outrage. A worker at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, better known as FEMA, has been fired after she told a team responding to hurricane survivors to avoid homes with yard signs showing support for Donald Trump. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell called the employee's actions, quote, reprehensible, saying in a statement on Sunday, this is a clear violation of FEMA's core values and principles to help all people regardless of their political affiliation.
While FEMA did not identify the employee or say when or where this action took place, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis reshared a post from the Daily Wire, who originally reported the story on Friday, saying it happened in Florida in the aftermath of Hurricane Milton. The deadly storm hit the Sunshine State last month.
Some are saying that firing the employee is not enough. We need to go further than that. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley wrote on X, FEMA officials discriminated against Trump voters, totally illegal. I'm asking the Inspector General to launch a full investigation immediately. Everyone involved needs to be identified, fired, and if necessary, prosecuted. Florida Representative Anna Paulina Luna wrote as well, it is unacceptable for FEMA to withhold life-saving assistance based solely on one's political beliefs. Hurricanes severely impacted Pinellas County and lives were tragically lost. This situation is far from over. We will get to the bottom of it and demand full accountability. And of course, Congressman Byron Donalds also chimed in, writing, anyone involved should be fired immediately. We are one nation. We are one people. We have one shared destiny. Your politics should never determine whether you receive disaster relief. I think that is totally uncontroversial, and I'm glad that the FEMA director condemned this and took action to fire this employee. Of course, Republicans are not fully satisfied with just that, want to know if this is systemic, if other employees were doing the same thing, and if criminal charges are merited. I don't know if any of those things are the case, but I think an investigation to determine if there is additional culpability or other activities like this going on seems merited.
Investigations cost money, Robby.
Oh, now we're going to be penny pinching?
They cost money, and you don't like to spend money.
I love this. When it's
like
something liberals don't like, they're like, oh, do we have the money to do this?
No, I was saying to you that you don't like to spend money on things. And an investigation over they obviously have a systemic situation. There's systems in place to make sure that something like this, if it happens, they're held accountable. Now, what I would like to know is why Donald Trump withheld FEMA money from Puerto Rico for so long. What I would like to know is why he was explicitly, spreading disinformation about FEMA in this election.
Was it disinformation?
Yes.
Disinformation? Again, people were saying, no. FEMA would never, by people I mean the mainstream media, the fact checkers, no, FEMA would never, ever, ever have the relief money be political or partisan or weaponized against people who are critical of FEMA or Donald Trump or Republicans or something. And now we have an example of exactly that happening. I mean, I know that's not the same thing as the whole agency being complicit or systemic, but it's a warning, I must say, to liberals, to Democrats, to fact checkers, to all those, to the media, to not make sweeping claims, say, oh, you can't criticize FEMA. That would be crazy. FEMA came under massive criticism from liberals, from Democrats, from the media when it was the George Bush administration. I remember that, don't you? I'm sure you do as well. It was the heck of a job brownie comment. That got George Bush in so much trouble. Again, liberals and the media used to be more scrutinizing and more critical of power and of establishments and of systems, and now it's like you got to defend the system, even when it obviously will make mistakes sometimes. I think you look very foolish.
I don't think that's what they were doing. Nobody was saying,
how dare you criticize
FEMA.
FEMA. It's crazy.
No, they weren't saying, how dare you criticize FEMA. They were saying how Donald Trump did it and how he spread disinformation. He was saying that they weren't showing up on the ground. Well, yes, they were showing up on the ground, but as we discussed on the show, FEMA has been underfunded and everybody's been stretched thin. People are quitting in FEMA because they're doing the jobs of 5 or 6 people. So not only have they been not able to fill all of the jobs, but they're not getting funding from Congress. Congress tried to at least pull back money, mostly Republicans, in the springtime. And let's also not forget that Donald Trump withheld FEMA funds for California fires against his liberal opponents in California at the time because he wanted to punish California and progressives like Gavin Newsom. I mean, he uses FEMA
billions
as a weapon,
have been made available to FEMA to help with hurricane relief, and that's good. That's happening.
And it was used, but I'm saying under Trump, he was the one who used FEMA as a political weapon. He wouldn't release the funds in time for Puerto Rico.
Did he tell them to skip over people who have Kamala or Biden signs in front of their front yard? Don't give them aid?
No, he just picked a whole state that wasn't a red state. I mean, we know how vindictive Donald Trump is. So the fact that one person in one situation who is, there are mistakes made in big agencies, of course, and we condemn that.
But it speaks to a central criticism of what Donald Trump and Republicans call the deep state, is the will of all the bureaucrats, all the administrators of all these vast federal programs. We know their political leanings skew about 99%, not even just like center-left, but progressive. The most progressive people in the country by trade and affiliation, if they're not university professors or administrators, they're in the federal government administering programs like FEMA or for the rest of the departments. Those people skewed progressive Democrat, and then how are they? Well, I mean, we know what parties they are more likely to give to. We know based on survey results. Do you deny that people who work for the federal government are disproportionately Democratic, except in a few key agencies?
Yeah, I think if you're going to look at public service workers like teachers, or yes, they lean way more Democratic, but not fully. I mean, you've been to Long Island before. There are plenty of conservative. There's more teachers per capita in Long Island, and Long Island is not very blue. So,
I mean, public school teachers are overwhelmingly Democrat.
Yes, that's why I'm giving you an example. I agree.
People who work in the education department are even more overwhelmingly Democrat.
I agree on that, but there are definitely
that's true all the way down. There are a couple agencies. Defense probably skews more evenly. It still doesn't skew massive. There's no agency or department you can find. There's no department you can find where in the federal government, I'm going to assert this, and I'm probably correct, where you would find a majority of people in a large enough department are Republican. Not a single one.
Not everybody can work for the American Enterprise Institute. Don't you know? The masses can't do that. We're not all equipped for the elite echelons of conservative society. I love how conservatives are always like, oh man, the elites, the Democratic elites, and then you sit here and you talk about low-wage workers and unionized workers, and they're all Democrats. It's like, well, if you go to places like American Enterprise Institute, or you look up these conservatives who write these books and who are the columnists, they all have Ivy League degrees.
Are you picking on AEI right now because I said I'm going to their annual gala this evening? Yes, I'm dusting off my tuxedo for a fancy dinner at AEI tonight.
Among the elites.
Where Mitch McConnell is the honored speaker. So I make no mistake. I don't pretend to not hobnob. We are the elites. We are not pretending that we're not the elite. We work for a major media corporation. But I think it is important to keep track of what non-elite people think and their sources of information and their very frequently justified grievances against an elite class that has abandoned them or not paid attention to what's gone wrong for them. And talk to people on the ground who survived these hurricanes and see how they feel about the job FEMA did. And I think it's very dismissive of the real problems. I'm not saying you're doing this specifically, but when media figures come back to them and say, oh, but no, FEMA's doing a great job. Look at all these facts and figures we have to say everything's great. And I guess you fell for disinformation. You're so gullible. You're so stupid. It just doesn't work. It's not a good outreach strategy. And maybe that speaks to what went wrong with the Democratic Party's outreach to these voters.
I think fundamentally
Don't do it.
That's the issue.
You won't get
Every
ahead.
politician needs to listen to what people are feeling and disconnect from the stats, data, whatever, and really be on the ground and have a vibe check, right? If we're all about vibes, you got to vibe check the voters as well.
All right, coming up next, we'll turn to some more exciting subjects to talk about on Rising, and we can't wait to get to it. I can't wait to find out what is next. Angela McArdle is the chair of the Libertarian Party. Now, she attracted both praise and also some criticism months ago when she invited former President Donald Trump to attend the Libertarian National Convention and make a pitch to libertarians for their vote. McArdle thinks that gambit paid off and that Donald Trump made promises to libertarian voters, like appointing a libertarian to his cabinet and freeing Ross Ulbricht, someone libertarians believe was unjustly sentenced to life in prison. But others say that cozying up to Trump has come at a cost. The Libertarian Party, after all, has its own candidate, Chase Oliver. While we haven't finished counting all the votes, it does look like Oliver has underperformed recent LP candidates. Now, Oliver told Reason Magazine, where I also work, that, quote, I think we did the best we could, considering that there's been a lot of headwinds in this campaign. First and foremost, the two-party system, always trying to relegate alternative parties' voices, and also, he said, internal disputes within the party led to a less than full-throated support from national leadership. But is this outcome worth it if it means that Trump is listening to libertarians? Is Trump listening to libertarians? To discuss all this and more, I am joined by Angela McArdle. So happy to have you on Rising to discuss all of this.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the Trump cabinet administration picks we're seeing right now. Obviously, this is happening like in real time. I didn't even see that, Kristi Noem got picked for Homeland Security. To me, that's a kind of neutral, might be fine. I did appreciate how she ran her state during COVID. She was more skeptical than others about some of the mandates that could be encouraging from a civil liberties standpoint, I think, if she got into the administration. Then you have someone like Marco Rubio now being discussed, not confirmed as of this moment, but very much sounds like might be the choice for State Department. Elise Stefanik, UN ambassador. These are, in my view, and tell me what yours is, more neoconservative leaning voices, the exact kind of people that libertarians were hoping would not be part of the next administration. So how are you processing all this? Where's your thinking at?
I think we're going to see a more libertarian slant on domestic policy, but I never had high hopes for libertarian foreign policy this term. I'm hopeful that it won't get any worse. I think that Donald Trump is proud of the fact that he didn't start any new wars. So I think that's probably his goal this term. Libertarians should sort of adjust the bar as we're sort of riding this high of seeing Elon Musk come in and talk about shredding the federal government. I think that Donald Trump is going to try to negotiate peace with Russia, do something to de-escalate the conflicts in the Middle East. But I never thought that we were going to come in and have a purely libertarian administration. I think that people got maybe their hopes kind of set at the wrong metric.
Yeah, I never got my hopes up. My expectations were probably even lower than yours because I know that Trump is not a particularly ideological figure and has mostly made personnel choices in the past about who looks good to him on TV, who's a fighter, who he thinks is doing a good rhetorical job of backing him up. Now, he has sometimes listened to non-interventionist voices, and that's been good. I personally would like if he's listening to people who think the education department can go and all that, involving someone like... let's talk about the explicit promises that you thought you got out of him after the Libertarian Convention appearance. My understanding is that's pardoning or freeing or whatever Ross Ulbricht,
Yes.
who, if most of our viewers probably know who that is, but was a libertarian-aligned person who got sentenced to life in prison for running a platform, Silk Road, that made possible all sorts of transactions, including illegal transactions, but he wasn't the one involved in that. He was just the innovator on behalf of the platform, and he got charged, we would argue, very unjustly, and it's been a major libertarian issue to get him released. Trump didn't do it during the first term, could have but didn't. So I've been skeptical that he's going to do it during the second term, but that's one of the things he said to you he would do, and then also add a libertarian to the cabinet. Am I missing anything?
I mean, those are the big ones, right? It's free Ross Ulbricht, abolish the Department of Education, and put a libertarian in the cabinet. Those are the things that I'm focused on and trying to make sure that they happen, white knuckling it through the rest of it while everybody's losing their minds on the internet over Marco Rubio, who thankfully is not, he's not appointed yet. So there's still a little hope there. I do think he's going to free Ross Ulbricht. I don't know that Ross is going to literally walk out of prison on day one. I think there's still time that has to transpire in order for him to be processed and so on and so forth. But, I've arranged meetings between President Trump and, members of the Ulbricht family. It seems like it's actually going to happen. And he has made comments about it, not just, privately to me and publicly to the convention, but, at the Bitcoin conference, to other people that we know. He's got all the clemency paperwork and all of that already squared away, at least, the packages and things that have been worked up so far. So I think it looks very realistic that it's going to happen and that Ross will be out in less than 30 days, including the time it takes to actually accomplish that, which I don't know. I don't know how much time it takes to get the paperwork over and process someone out of a prison, but I'm very optimistic on that.
If it's day one or day 30, we can take the win on that. I agree with you there. So I very much hope we see that. On the cabinet appointments, if we got like Massey in charge of agriculture, Rand Paul in charge of that would be phenomenal. That would be such a success, I think, from the libertarian point of view. I guess my to give voice to the fear, or libertarians, I know some of them who are skeptical of the approach you've taken. If it's just some minor official in some minor government post, or if it's even like RFK Jr., who is right now very proximate to Trump and whom I agree with on some things, and I'm glad has shined a light on free speech violations and some COVID overreach, but also has a long history of supporting environmental regulation and health regulation in ways that are not libertarian. So paradoxically, if like the libertarian choice is him for a role in which he does not align with libertarianism, we can't call that a win, right?
No, and I mean, Donald Trump has made some joking comments about how he's not putting Kennedy anywhere near oil, near our liquid gold. So I think that he's mindful of that, and I think Elon Musk is sort of balancing that out. I am optimistic about seeing a massive deregulation across the country, which is really going to help job growth. And it's one of the less sexy libertarian talking points, but it is very libertarian. I imagine that we're going to get a libertarian like in the Department of Education, which is a very almost impossible to screw it up place. Just get rid of it. Just kill as much of it as you can. I don't think we're going to get anything like Secretary of State or, something big like that. But whatever we give, I'm just going to be grateful. It's a foot in the door. We have to remember to have long-term vision on this. It doesn't matter if it's something fairly innocuous, if it's not like the biggest prize, it's a foot in the door. The neocons used to be like a joke fringe think tank in DC, and now they control everything. It's because they got a foot in the door through William F. Buckley and probably the CIA. But I think we can do the same. We can start wedging our way in. If other people in the GOP will kick out a lot of the deep state people, then we'll be able to make some more advancements.
Well, you and I are going to continue talking about this long-term strategy and also what it means for the Libertarian Party. We're going to stay tuned for this weekend. The rest of my interview with Angela McArdle will be available. The Breakfast Club host Charlamagne Tha God on Monday mocked Caitlyn Jenner for her support of Donald Trump. Let's watch.
Caitlyn Jenner is a transgender, I think. I don't know anymore. I just know she doesn't identify as whatever she was born as. His mama used to call him Bruce, but now we call her Caitlyn. So yes, she's transgender. Now, if it's one thing this election taught me, is people really do vote their interest, and their interest is not attached to their identity. And I must say, it's fascinating to me. Okay, I really want to know the science behind this. Okay, Latinos and immigrants from other countries, they aren't afraid of things like mass deportation, because 46% of Latinos and 55% of Latino men voted for Donald J. Trump, even though he said on day one he will have a mass deportation push. Okay, most Latino men say they chose Trump because of economy and jobs. Never mind the fact, okay, that grandma may get sent back to her place of origin. How you say grandma in Hispanic? Abuela. Abuela may get sent back to her place of origin.
Charlamagne Tha God further said Caitlyn reaps the benefits of the community but does not stand for it. Let's watch.
Support someone that is absolutely trying to erase your existence. I'm just asking. Okay, Caitlyn, you are not what J.D. Vance would call a normal gay guy. I don't even know if you're gay at all. I don't know. And what I don't like is when someone can reap the benefits of a community but not stand up for the rights of that community. Caitlyn doesn't want to be an advocate for the trans community, but you damn sure took advantage of all the privileges that came with being trans.
Wow. Charlamagne Tha God, misgendered Caitlyn Jenner there.
Excellent.
Used a he pronoun. Where are the alarm bells? Alert the police? Is Charlamagne Tha God going to be taken to a re-education camp? I assume, at the very least, there will be widespread protesting from liberals. They did this to Chappelle. They called for his show to be canceled when he said some controversial things about a transgender activist. So the same standard must apply, right? Not my standard. I don't care that this was said. I don't protest people, and I think people should be able to express their mind, even if it's contrarian or unkind. But liberals, progressives have taken the position that this is unsayable. You can't do this. So I assume there will be calls for his head any minute.
See what I'm thinking.
Where are they? I'm waiting.
See what I'm thinking. I love the dramatics here. Is that the Democrats have learned their lesson from the election, and Charlamagne Tha God is like, now I'm going to speak like normal people, because Democrats have to gauge what's actually being conversed about on the ground. And I think that's also a reflection of his show. He corrected his misgendering. Let's be clear.
I mean, it was a little bit more than that. It was a little, I don't know what he is. It was very, it was treating Caitlyn Jenner like some kind of freak.
I don't agree with it, personally.
Donald Trump was once asked, I remember this, he has a friendship with Caitlyn Jenner, was asked, well, do you consider Caitlyn Jenner a woman? And he said, yes. So, well, what bathroom? Would Caitlyn Jenner use the women's bathroom at the Trump Hotel? And Trump said, yes. More progressive on this issue, I guess, than Charlamagne Tha God. Very interesting.
Perhaps that's it. But maybe this is how he's always been, and that is, I know, having done door-to-door work and campaigning, that the coalition of Democratic voters, and maybe we just didn't get the message, is diverse, definitely around cultural issues. And I think Charlamagne Tha God, this isn't his first issue that he's been culturally conservative on or controversial about. Will they call for him to be fired? I have no idea. I think the problem with Chappelle was it was during a moment, and that moment happened to be wrong for him. And guess what? He's still on Netflix.
That was a joke. That was comedy.
Special.
This is sincere commentary.
I didn't want him to step down either, but I also saw him at the DNC. He was at the Democratic Convention supporting Kamala Harris, and no one seemed to be yelling at him there. So
I think it's just weird to get more worked up about jokes than about what was sincere. And I don't care that that's his view. Fine. And look, I get that I think he's very upset that Donald Trump won. There was a little bit of kind of, I think, blaming of categories of people that how could Latinos vote for this? How could they? They're going to get themselves deported or something. He kind of said to that nature. But the reality is that even many Latino people are concerned about illegal immigration and voted to indicate that. Even illegal immigrants will often be interviewed right after crossing the border and say, "Yeah, we got to lock this down. This is no good." That tells you something.
Well, I think what he is actually revealing, and maybe he was doing it in a less eloquent way than probably you and I would, but he basically was revealing that there are complicated dynamics in diverse groups of voters. And so like Latinos, for instance, obviously it could be what generation you are, where you came from, how you immigrated, what status you are from that country, meaning are you more elite, are you not so much? I mean, if you've traveled around Latin America or have lived in Latin America like I have, you know very well that the color of your skin very much reflects what your values are in that country and where you might be leaning politically. So yeah, cultures are complicated. And with the black vote in particular, which he's been discussing on the show, I think he's very annoyed, rightfully so, that black men in particular pulled away from Kamala Harris. Just a couple of points, but he has a huge audience. And so maybe that's a way of bringing them back.
I think it's a good thing, and I'm glad people not myopically voting as a monolith ostensibly because some mainstream institution has told them, no, the interests of people who look like you or are like you are to just vote Democratic or Republican or whatever, and that people are more free-thinking than that. Right, on its surface, it seems absurd to people in the mainstream that Caitlyn Jenner could possibly be a supporter of Donald Trump or the Republican Party, given that conservatives, social conservatives, have certainly been more hostile to aspects of transgender issues than the Democratic Party. But Caitlyn Jenner is not monomaniacally focused on just those issues. She also cares about regulation and taxes and foreign policy, and thinks that the Republican Party is better on those things. I can't tell you how many gay people I talked to who voted Trump for the first time in the last election because they don't think there's any threat to gay marriage or non-discrimination coming out of the Republican Party. What they care about is the same issues everybody else cares about: inflation, immigration, the foreign policy situation, and so you can't just rely on the votes of various identity groups. I think relying on the votes of identity groups has been a cardinal mistake of the Democratic Party.
I think that's what intersectional feminism is. That's what intersectional identity issues are. Is you're dealing with class and you're dealing with identity. But I think what's unique about Caitlyn Jenner is her privilege. She has extraordinary wealth.
That's true.
Extraordinary privilege. She's a Fox News contributor. Has a,
I don't know if she's a
megaphone.
Fox contributor, but she's been on Fox, yes.
At one point she was a contributor. And this is somebody who does not deal with the day-to-day obstacles that most transgendered people do deal with. Housing crisis. There's a crisis of substance abuse. In New York, there's an entire facility an organization dedicated to helping transgendered people find housing, because oftentimes they're not given housing. They can't find jobs to be able to put down the down payment. And then sometimes, in some cases, and there is an epidemic of this, they turn to, not following the law in certain ways, in all sorts of criminal acts. And so I'm not saying it comes with being transgender. I'm saying that.
Well, I mean, it's just the reality. There's a high level of overlap between illegal drug activity and, frankly, in sex work.
Yeah, and sex work, of course.
The trans community.
Yeah, but it's a crisis, and folks are trying to deal with it. But that's because there's systemic issues related to it. That's something Caitlyn Jenner just doesn't have to deal with. She's wealthy. She's famous. She has a megaphone. She's got billionaire kids who are doing great. Can always support her if something were to go wrong. Hopefully, I don't know what their deal is lately. I haven't been watching the Kardashians, but.
Yeah, I've never caught up with the Kardashians.
You've never caught up with the
but
Kardashians.
I enjoy Caitlyn Jenner's commentary when she's invited on Fox and other places. So interesting to parse all that. Well, that does it for us today on Rising. Thank you so much for watching. We always appreciate it. Let us know in the comments what you think, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. And I will see you back here tomorrow.